Good morning to everyone. Welcome to our Pareshat class on Pareshat Behaalotecha. And it's a loaded parsha. It relates to something that people used to do in the olden days. It's called travel. I don't know if you've heard that once upon a time, people would leave their location and go to another location. That's what I read it in history books. As you know, I read history. But this is what this parsha talks about at some point, but it's really divided into two parts. Part one of this week's parsha describes the tail end activities at Har Sinai, meaning they received the Torah, they remained by that mountain for another 11 months and 20 days, and eventually they do depart. So the Torah is going to describe the tail end of what is taking place at Mount Sinai, at Har Sinai, which includes guidance to the high priest, designation of the Levites of the Leviim, also the idea that the Paschal, the Korban Pesach, due to its significance, we have this opportunity, this option of making up. In other words, when you miss the first date, you could do it on the second date. That's what appears. And then the Torah tells us that eventually they left Har Sinai, they left Mount Sinai, and the Torah is going to describe the departure. Now, the Parsha itself continues into the many downfalls our ancestors had after leaving Mount Sinai. This wasn't a smooth departure. And that's what's described in the last part of the Parsha. The Parsha itself is divided smack in the middle with two verses that are significant in many ways. We've discussed in the past that these two verses, which you have on reference number 1, which we're going to go ahead and go open the screen here. Let's share this, okay? Do you see here reference number 1? Vayhi bin Soha Aaron Vayomer Moshe. And if you remember, once upon a time, we would sing that. Vayhi bin Soha Aaron Vayomer Moshe. This is what we sing as we take out the Torah. And it talks about the people of Israel beginning their journey, but unfortunately, we have enemies. And we turn to the Almighty and we say, Ve'yafutzu oyevecha, may your enemies, who are our enemies as well, be scattered. Ve'yanusu misanecha, and may those who hate you flee. That is what we are told in the first verse. The second verse talks about tranquility. Uvenuchoh yomar. What do we say when we reach that moment of tranquility? Shuva, rest Almighty in the multitudes and the thousands of the Israelites. So these two verses are extremely significant. If you do remember in a Chumash, they even have these parentheses before and after indicating that they are unique. So what we're going to have an opportunity at some point is to clarify what is the significance of these verses? What's the message there? So that's going to be issue number 1 we're going to want to address in our discussion today. Reference number 2, the Torah describes these trumpets, and actually relates to shofros as well, that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Okay? And as we all know from the Yamim Noraim, from the high holiday season, there are two types of sounds that are produced by trumpets and shofarot. One of them is called the truah, which is a sound of a cry, which is the middle sound during the Yamim Noraim, during Rosh Hashanah. And the other one is the tkiyah, the simple sound. And the Torah tells us, if you look at reference number 2, that when it came time to travel, when our ancestors would see the indications that it is time to move on, they would actually hear them as well, because there would be a sound of a truah. And therefore, we are told in reference number 2 that when the time came to travel, utkatem truah, you should go ahead and sound the blast of a truah. Tu, right? It's the sound of a cry. And when that would be heard, v'nasu hamachanot achonim kedma, and that's when the journey began. The journey began with a truah. Okay? Now, this verse tells us that you should know that the other sound, the tki'ah, was for a time of gathering. Ubehakilet haka'al. When you want to gather and bring together the Israelites, that is when you move to the other sound, the sound of the tki'ah, the simple sound. And then the verse tells us that you should know if there's war in the land of Israel, Bachi, Tavo, Milchama be'artzechem. If you go out to war, what do? Also, there is a sound that is needed. You got to inform everyone that it is time to move on. So therefore, you use these trumpets to blast, but with the sound of a truah, v'hare'otem. And then in verse 10, we are told that at times of celebration where we gather together, then it is a tki'ah. So what we're going to have to address is why is it that at times the sounds required would be the truah, the unstable cry-like sound, and why at other times the necessary sound was the simple tki'ah. Okay, and just to summarize here, at a time of travel and at a time of war, you have the truah. At a time of gathering and celebration, it's a tki'ah. Okay, now, the last section of the Parsha, which talks about our ancestors complaining about the food. Can you believe it? That the Jews were complaining about the food, right? And this is even before sushi. The ancestors complained that they need flesh, they need meat. And the meat is supplied through the slav, a type of bird. But nevertheless, it appears that that was not enough to address the issues they were facing. They also needed an adjustment with leadership. And therefore, after Moshe Rabbeinu in reference 3 says, Lo chal anochi levadi laset et kol ha'am hazeh. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can't deal with this whole nation. Forget, it's impossible. It is too overwhelming to deal with the people of Israel. They're great, they're wonderful, but boy, can they be overwhelming to the leader. So therefore, the Almighty says, you know what? We're going to address that issue, and we're going to bring in the 70 elders. Vayomer el Moshe esfali shivim ish meziknei Israel. Bring forth the 70 elders. And it's a fascinating section, which in the past we've looked through the verses, how the nation requests meat, and they get meat plus elders. And in what way does that satisfy their appetite, right? They're not cannibals, so we have to clarify in what way do the elders help. So that's going to be our discussion today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn to a very significant insight of the Malbim. Malbim, late 19th century authority, and he gives us and presents for us some information. The Malbim presents to us some information that is helpful for our understanding of Rosh Hashanah and our understanding as well of what is taking place in this week's Parsha. And it works as follows. We, in this year, also known as 2020, but for us it's Tafshin Pei, has been a challenging year, to put it lightly, right? In one of the WhatsApps, people were circulating a line that 2020 is a year where it is like as if you were planning to cross a street. You looked both ways to be sure there are no cars. And then as you cross, you were hit by an airplane, right? Meaning nothing was predictable with what we are dealing with. I think we are a little bit nervous looking south of the border at the chaos that is taking place. And I don't know to what extent it means to not fund the police, to defund the police department, but I would not want to be in a city where the police is not doing what they should be doing. And we are dealing with times that we have to pray. We have to pray that we get out of it in safety and security on many ends. So a lot of challenges we are addressing. Obviously, a percentage of what is taking place is the media, right? Adding as much fuel as they can to the fire because they believe that they're going to gain a president they want in November if they make it appear even more chaotic than what it is. That's my personal take on what's taking place. But as a Torah Jew, what I think is, boy, what a messed up Rosh Hashanah that was. In other words, yes, I davened Rosh Hashanah, and yes, perhaps a few moments it was intense, other moments perhaps not as much. I'm not at that level to keep the intensity for 5-6 hours straight, and not for 24 or 48 hours straight, or not for the Aseret Yimei Tshuva straight. But nevertheless, things were determined, Rosh Hashanah back in Tishrei about this year. And who knows, maybe it's a lesson to always pray even for or perhaps especially for the unknown. Rosh Hashanah is significant, we know it. However, when you make something too heavy and too significant and too overwhelming, you reject it. So therefore, Rosh Hashanah has always needed, Yomim Noraim, the high holiday season, always needs that adjustment to keep it just right. You can't be too overwhelmed by how intense it is because then you walk away. How on earth are we still supposed to transmit to our children, right, the beauty of Judaism when they see us during the Aseret Yimei Tshuva, ois mensch, they see us as depressed beings. On the other hand, we do know that it is a significant period of time, so we do have to be mindful of it. How do we balance it? Not easy. But the sounds and the blasts of the shofar actually provide for us precise guidance how to deal with the season. And as the Malbim in reference number 4 tells us that you should know, when it comes to the tru'ah, when it comes to the middle sound, let's review the sounds of Rosh Hashanah. Tkiya, tru'ah, tkiya. Tru'ah, yes, there's a question how it sounds, if it's a tu-tu-tu-tu-tu, or a tu-tu-tu, or perhaps both together, but it is the sound of a cry. That's a tru'ah. It's a cry. And therefore, writes the Malbim that you should know that the tru'ah, ba le'orer pachad v're'ada me'emat hadin u'me'irat ha'onesh. That cry is there to awaken within us a fear and trembling from the intensity of the judgment and from the fear of punishment. So that tru'ah is that intense musar shmuz that you get, that intense rebbe that you perhaps had, or teacher that you perhaps had, or someone you stand next to during davening that takes it and feels with great trepidation that we are during a time of judgment. On the other hand, says Malbim, the tkiyah, the sound, the blast of the tkiyah, more al hasimcha, we're happy, we're triumphed, we're happy. Tkiyah, the majority, by the way, of the sounds of Rosh Hashanah are tkiyah. And it indicates we are happy, we feel privileged, we have meaning in life, we understand what existence is about, right? We don't look back and say, oh, Gewalt, I'm getting older, what's, all the fun is over. We understand that we have a journey, a mission, we have responsibility. And once there's meaning, there's happiness. And that's the tkiyah. Now, Malbim notes that you should know that when it comes to awakening, hitorerut letshuva, awakening to tshuva, that comes from the side of pachad, the fear of punishment, is what he calls a madrega shfela ad me'od, a very low madrega, a very low level. It's not ideal. The ideal way of utilizing the high holiday season, the Yom Noraim, the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is by being privileged. Yes, there is some fear, but you got to sandwich it in between the feeling of triumph, of privilege, of happiness. That's the guidance that the Malbim gives us for the season. And it applies to this week's Parsha because now, so yes, we have some information that will help us as we start thinking, or perhaps don't want to think yet, of the high holiday of Yom Noraim. Not easy, by the way, to plan it when you can't plan tomorrow during this period of time, how much more so that which is going to occur in a couple months. So yes, we have an insight regarding the Yom Noraim, but what we have here that clarifies for us what this parsha is about is an understanding how to view the different sounds. That when it comes to tkiya, triumph, and therefore, when people gather together, when we gather together as a nation, that's a triumph. You merited to be by the Kotel and see a lot of people together. That's a triumph. We gather together in shul. We feel unified. We get along with one another, right? We say nice things to one another. We uplift one another with a good line, right? Tkiya, that's a tkiya. You're uplifted. Be happy. You have a Yom Tov, we gather together, tkiya. That's what we are told. When on the other hand, we are being chas v'sholem attacked, that's the cry. And so too, right? Let's look back at what we saw earlier, right? That when it comes to the time of journey, when it comes to the time of traveling, when we have to move from place to place, Utkatem tru'a v'nosua machanot. You want to know what's an indication that it is time to travel? The sound of the cry, the sound of the tru'a. And if you ask why is it with travel it's a time to cry? So I'll share with you an insight of two great thinkers from different periods. One from the 15th century and one from the 19th century. And they're going to both note that travel is a challenge. Why is travel a challenge? Especially, you could relate to it now. Like when we think of travel, by the way, right? Well, what do you think? Yeah, I traveled. It was nice. I got upgraded. I was able to go into the lounge. I couldn't eat anything, but at least I could see what others were eating, right? So that's how we think of travel. Travel, number one, historically has been challenging and difficult and draining, okay? And sometimes I think we still feel it. Have you ever been stuck in an airport more longer than you want to? Think about those moments. That's the challenge of travel. But it also represents something that's even deeper, which we're going to address now. So let's look at two commentators that are going to point and address and clarify why we view the journey as a time for truah, why we view the journey as a time of crying. So first one is the Akedat Yitzchak, the great Rabbi Yitzchak Arma, 15th century thinker, philosopher, Torah scholar. And he tells us that you should know, Hatkiya hapshuta, a simple tkiya, siman hasimcha, that's a sign of happiness. Vehayishuv, and you feel settled. You feel settled. I'm happy where I am, right? I can meditate, think about the Almighty. That is the simple tkiya. On the other hand, when it comes to the truah indicates instability. Because in his words, en tnu'ah, there's no such thing as movement, bli tsa'ar ve'etzev, without pain and sadness. Why? Explains to us this philosopher, Ki kol tnua, every movement, Torah indicates al chesron davar, something's lacking. In other words, if I need to get to somewhere else, what does that indicate? That at this moment, I need to be there. There's something that is there that I don't have here. I don't have something. I don't have something. I am lacking. That is pain. Okay? So that's how the philosopher, that Kedat Yitzchak, explains that when you are traveling, right, it's an indication that I don't have what I need here. I need to get there. And therefore, it is a time of a truah. And so too says Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, a 19th century thinker. B'sha'at masa, at a time of travel, ha'adam baderech hu betirda, he's tarud, he is occupied. V'tsa'ar ve'eno b'naicha, he's not in a comfort zone. Travel indicates pain. Okay, that is the journey of truah. It's also the uncertainty that travel brings, right? Think about it historically. And how much more so when it comes to our ancestors in the wilderness, where our ancestors did not know how long they will be traveling for, right? It was up to the Almighty. And I personally, I look at this period of time, and we have some challenges. I mean, there's a little bit of an anxiety. There's a lot of loneliness that we are facing. But the uncertainty, right, and this lack of clarity, we don't have a date. You know, the Almighty did not provide for us a date as when this is going to end, when things are going to, or if they are going to return to normal, or what is normal. And that level of, we are in a journey now, right, because where we are, we don't want to be here. At least I feel like that, and I assume that others do as well. We want to return. I want to return to a shul. I want to return to a community. I want to return to interacting with people, to seeing people, not just on a screen, but actually interacting with people. I'm on a journey. We're all on a journey, and we are in a period of truah, because whenever you are somewhere that you want to be somewhere else, welcome to the truah existence. Now, with that, I've shared in the past that Judaism views life as one that has two different types of periods. One of them is a period of Ana Hashem Hoshiana. We need salvation. Right? There are times we're dealing, sometimes as individuals. Sometimes as individuals we have a crisis. There's something we are dealing with. And we turn to the Almighty and say, Ana Hashem Hoshiana. We need salvation. Right? This person is not so healthy right now. Right? At times as a community, right? When we can't go into shuls, right? Shuls that were operating for, in many cases, decades upon decades are suddenly shut. This is a Ana Hashem Hoshiana. And then there are times when we have to focus on Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. We should have continued success. In other words, there are times when things are good. We don't need that salvation, but we have to have success in our existence. Now, what exactly is success in our existence? So let's go back to reference number one. Reference number one, two verses that define this idea that all of Judaism is about journeys that are truah, that are not easy, and then moments of tranquility. And our avodas Hashem, our job and our mission is very, very different. There are times that we have to focus on crying out to the Almighty, and those are the moments of journey, of travel. Vayehi bin Soaron. And when you travel, when you're going through that journey, when you are waiting for that, better tomorrow, when you are waiting for that better tomorrow, that is a time that we deal with enemies. Enemies don't have to be just external enemies, right? Sometimes devastation, depression, feeling overwhelmed, right? When I need to get to the next point, right? Personally or as a community, there are moments that you feel that the world's coming to an end, right? What's life about, right? How am I gonna, I wanted to visit New York City, but now the place is shattered, right? I want to visit my kids somewhere, but the Vervasive police force is going to be activated because Black Lives Matter, right? And what happens in a society that policemen are viewed as terrible people? Do you think they're going to do their job? Do you think qualified people are going to enter into the police force, right? What's going to happen with this attitude that's taking place, that because of a few bad apples, we go ahead and claim that all police is bad? These are terrible times. These are terrible challenges. We want to move on from it. And we have enemies as a result, internal enemies, depression, feeling overwhelmed. So, Vayehi bin Soa ha'aron vayomer Moshe, Kuma Hashem v'yafutzo ayevecha. That is a prayer of journey. And that's the time that we have to turn to the Almighty with our truah, with our cry, that we should have the ability to get over it. Verse number 2 in reference number 1, when things calm down, may they calm down, let's be appreciative. Let's realize that tranquility is a gift from above that the Almighty gives us to appreciate Him and appreciate the world. And when things are tranquil, right, enjoy the world and recognize it as a gift from God. Now, by the way, in no way am I claiming that we are in this terrible time, because it's a complete exaggeration, right? Pick up any literature from the Second World War period, and that is Shreklach. Here, Baruch Hashem, I even have a good cup of coffee in front of me. I had my oatmeal for breakfast. And Baruch Hashem, overall we're secure. The weather is nice. Allergies are coming to an end. I mean, life is Baruch Hashem. There's a lot of Anna Hashem Otzlichana. There are many, many moments I have when I'm very appreciative. But at the same time, unfortunately, there are things that I have to turn to the Almighty and realize I'm in a journey, and I'm not in a tkiya, but in a truah mode. So we have those blends. We're living with these blends. So what we have to learn from these verses and from this parsha, to be in tune with the moments. When things are good and I have my good moments, I'm going to be appreciative and say, Rabban Shalom, this is incredible. Thank you so much. When I get overwhelmed, especially when you read the news, perhaps I shouldn't read the news, but when I do, I have to say, Anna Hashem Hoshiana. These are not good things that we are reading about, right? That's what these two psukim tell us. And that's what reference number 2 tells us, because now we have an understanding. When you travel, it's a truah. When you gather, it's not a cry, it's a tkiyah, it's a triumph. When there's a war in Pasuk Tet, when there's a war, truah. When on the other hand, it's a day of happiness, a day of celebration, and then it should be a tkiyah. That is what we are told. Very important message. Now, what exactly, back to reference number 3, we have to clarify the last section of the parsha, right? The last section of the parsha, where Moshe Rabbeinu is overwhelmed and the Almighty says, you know what? You need 70 elders, right? In what way is that in a Asfeli Shivim Ish Meziknei Israel? What is that about? So there is an issue that we as Jews sometimes struggle with, and believe it or not, even in literature, we struggle with this issue. Are we members of the human race, or due to the fact that we experienced the revelation at Sinai, are more connected to God and detached from humanity? Where do you place Israel? I don't know if you've heard that there have been thinkers in the past that talk about the world, that there are those things that are alive, then there are humans, and above humans are the Jewish people, which doesn't sound so good to many of us, right? Are we a better race? You don't want that being spoken about in the environment we live in this day and age. But nevertheless, we do know that we have a very unique role, but are we still part of humanity? And I don't know if some of you would be shocked to hear this, that while most of us who are rational are very, very careful, right, that we don't go and we don't have gatherings, even for mitzvahs during this period of time, there's an opinion that believes that if you are involved in a mitzvah, you're protected. And even though humanity might have this issue with corona, if you do a mitzvah, you're protected, right? Sounds odd, it does to me at least, but the concept that there's such a discussion indicates that there are those who view the Jewish world as one that is detached from humanity. And the truth is, after the experience at Sinai, in some ways we were. Okay? In the verse of Tehillim, Bnei Elyon Kulchem, it is as if we were all children of God. We were detached from humanity. And that's because we were guided by a supernatural leader called Moshe Rabbeinu. And that would have worked if things would have remained stable. If we would have remained in a status of tkiyah, of feeling uplifted. We're at Sinai, we're connected to God, we're connected to Torah, we're connected to the purpose of existence. We have a leader like Moshe Rabbeinu. If the nation would have remained on that state, we would have been indeed different than humanity. But then we leave Mahar Sinai and we start complaining because after all, we are human. And the human elements of our being awakened. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, when the nation itself complains that they need meat, there's a detachment from Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a detachment. And some of you could probably remember some old Rabbeim who came from Europe. They came from Europe, and they had absolutely no understanding of what an American kid is about. These are things I read about. That you had in the late 1940s educators who came from overseas, some of them Holocaust survivors. Some of them were indeed very spiritual individuals. They studied in yeshivot, they did not have any distractions, and then they unfortunately have to come and teach children who are more interested in the Yankees and the Dodgers than in Abaye and Rava and Rashi and Rambam. And the Rebbe simply has no clue how to talk to them because they're not just from different cultures, they're from different planets. Because for the Rebbe, he has no understanding how is it that you follow one guy throwing the ball to another one and hitting it with a piece of wood. It was something that simply they weren't able to relate to. And the problem is that when you have a Rebbe that the student views as an alien, she's not going to be inspired by him, right? And it's a problem sometimes in some shuls, by the way, where they get very choshev rabbonim, but they view the Rav as someone that's detached, right? They see him, he's a supernatural being. So obviously I'm not going to share with him my personal issues, and I'm not going to ask him for halachic guidance because he's on such a high level, right? That how can I relate to him? And that is a problem that is minor when it comes to shuls, but it is major with yeshivot, right? Rabbinic yeshivot in North America went through a shift over the past 50, 60 years, where 50 years ago, there was this assumption that if you get a very great Torah scholar, Talmid Chacham as a Rosh Yeshiva, the students will figure out a way how to follow him and be inspired by him. That perhaps worked 50, 60 years ago. Not anymore. Today there's an understanding that if you want to have success, it has to be a Rebbe. It has to be a Rebbe that can relate to the young man, right? That could go ahead and understand where he's coming from. That is what changes when you move from a state of tranquility, Har Sinai, the Tkiya existence, to the journey when we are struggling. You know how it is that when you fall, and we all make our mistakes, there's this internal struggle. You don't feel good about yourself, right? At the same time, you know you should be doing better. And when you know that you've done wrong and you're supposed to be doing better, you feel this internal struggle. You're unsettled. You feel that trua. The Tkiya ruler, the Tkiya guide, the Moshe Rabbeinu, ain't gonna do it. You can't relate to him. He's detached. He is detached. You need someone that understands you, that relates to you, because you are a human, right? And by the way, it's no coincidence that the elders needed to deal with a nation who's on a lower level, who's more physical, who is, yes, a human being and part of the nations of the world. The number is 70. 70 is the number that we use in our tradition to describe the nations of the world. That is what is taking place in this week's Parsha, and understanding that, you know what? You have to address realities and bring in spiritual guides that know that reality. You know, when I went to yeshiva, as you know, in Chicago and Telz. And it's a place I have a tremendous amount of respect. We had a Rosh Yeshiva, was a tremendous Torah scholar. And the Rabbeim, in other words, the teachers, the ones that were chosen, to teach the 9th grade, 10th grade student, 11th grade student, were Torah scholars, Talmidei Chachomim. I don't know if they were great psychologists. I don't know if they really, really related well to the struggle of a kid in the 1980s, but they were chosen. But something changed. So when I was in yeshiva, there was a contemporary student who came from Milwaukee, and his name was Moti. Leave out the last name. His name was Moti. So Moti came from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to tell Chicago. And I wasn't there at the time, but according to legend, when he came into 9th grade, he barely knew how to read. Meaning he was not the strongest, he was good in sports, he was charismatic, but he was a hardworking individual, very, very hardworking individual. So Moti, through 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, continued his studies. And by the time he reached Beis Medrash, he was already a good student, a Torah scholar. Eventually, he married one of the daughters of one of the Rosh Yeshiva in Telz, Chicago. And today, he is not just a Rebbe in the high school, but in many ways, he is like one of the mashgiach, or one of the heads of the high school. And the beauty of choosing someone like him is because when the young student is struggling, right, or the young student wants to discuss a little bit more about basketball than Talmud, he has someone that was a very, very knowledgeable in that field, in the field of struggle and in the field of basketball, because it was someone that went through the journey, right? Someone that they could relate to. And there's an understanding nowadays that, yes, we need those guides, but the Moshe Rabbeinus are not going to do it. When a nation is kvetching, right? When a nation complains, and we all complain, right? Because we struggle. We have those good moments and those bad moments. If you don't have bad moments, please tell me what your recipe is. But as a human, we have those good moments when we feel elevated and worthy, and we feel we are involved in spirituality. But unfortunately, those are the moments what we feel the trua, the cry of existence. And we need guides. We need someone to turn to, someone that cares about us, number one. The person doesn't care, it makes no difference how much Talmud he knows, he's worthless. If he cares, then he can do something with us. And the 70 elders are those people that could relate to this nation in their new state. And the Torah is sharing with us this information because it's the portion of journey. And life is a journey. And a journey means you're not going to always be settled. And when you're not settled, you cry out to the Almighty that He should assist you. But at the same time, we need to seek out those leaders. We need to seek out people who could relate to us, who can understand our struggle, be concerned, and work with us. And that's what the Parsha is really teaching us about what a journey is about. So that is what we have for an understanding. Also, a little bit of an appreciation of the Yomim Noraim, of the Tkiya and the Trua, what it's about. And also, it's when a person is addressing any issue of struggle, it's important to recognize it, not to just talk to themselves that it doesn't exist. Recognize that we are in a challenging time. Recognize that there's loneliness. Recognize that the uncertainty is very uncomfortable and very unsettling. But then you go ahead and address it with prayer, and by doing what you could do, connecting to others. There are ways of connecting. That is what we do during this period of time. It would be important for us to remember that the Parsha, by the way, when you do read the Parsha, keep your eyes open for the word Asaf. It is mentioned many, many times in this week's Parsha, gathering. And gathering is what elders do. They gather, bring people together, right? And it's not just bringing people together, bringing the person together, right? You feel dispersed. You feel you're everywhere. Your mind is everywhere. When you have purpose and you have direction, it all comes together. That's what the Parsha is about. The Parsha ends off with Vatidaber Miriam, the Lashon Hara that Miriam spoke about Moshe, not a Lashon Hara that was there because she did not like him. She loved her brother, but the message of being sensitive with what we say is what the Torah wants us to walk away with, because if community is a time of triumph, we have to be careful what we say about others. This is what we are told. And he married Isha Kushit, where according to Rashi and the rabbinic tradition, it refers to Tzipora. You're familiar with the Ibn Ezra, who says that actually it relates to an Isha Kushit. And they talked about her because she mattered, because after all, Black lives matter. Anyway, thank you so much for participating in our class today. We're going to